Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the AK Pallav Show, where we bring passionate, inspiring, and sometimes a bit emotional stories about successful immigrants to life. And today's story is actually not just about the ups and downs that come when you move to a different country, but also about purpose, failure, being a survivor, and actually bootstrapping different businesses across the globe. So, without any further ado, I would like to welcome Ankur Joshi, who is the founder and CEO of Nuclei, serial entrepreneur, and also a self-proclaimed passionate dog lover, to the show. Ankur, warm welcome.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you, Pallav. It's an honor to be on your show.
I have a lot of questions because I saw your profile and also went through the introduction which you sent over. But I'm sure their introduction is just the tip of the iceberg. Ankur, why don't you start with your journey right from where you were raised to your undergrad and the journey thereon? We would love to hear how you got started.
A lot of anecdotes there, but okay. So I grew up in a town. I grew up in a town called Indore in Madhya Pradesh, which is in central India. At least when I was growing up in late 80s and mid 90s, it was a small town, and grew up in a fairly lower middle class family. But my parents worked extremely hard to do just one thing, to get me a good education, right? Uh, the fact that I'm a single kid was a financial decision, and not a population control decision, right? So it was a financial decision that we could potentially afford to only sponsor education for one kid. If we have two kids, then it will be difficult to provide both of them proper education. So that was a decision which they took, which I'm extremely grateful about, and not just for the education part, but like they have been supporting me throughout my life, and I don't know if I will ever be able to repay them back anything at all, right? For what they have done for me. But growing up in a joint family, in a very close knit community, it allows you to develop multiple aspects of your life, right? Multiple aspects in your personality. For example, I was in a group of around 15, 18 kids. Me and one more guy, we were the youngest kids, and we would never get to bat or bowl during a cricket match. So that drove my dislike for cricket and drove me towards football, right? I'll come to and connect you why that became so important later in life. But it drove me towards football, and both of us, we would not play cricket and we would only play football. And went through school teams playing football, went through college, was part of the college teams. Eventually, during placements, when I was sitting for a placement, I was 6 point. I was not supposed to get a day one job. The person who was interviewing me was from IIT Kanpur, and I had played football against him during inter-IIT competition, and we knew each other since like a couple of years. And therefore, when he was interviewing me, that interview was a breeze. Skipped through a couple of rounds, and ultimately got that job. So small things, butterfly effect, right? That point being that being youngest, probably a weak link in that group of cricket players, just drove me towards football, which ultimately you never know what comes to help you, right? But growing up in that society was very important because it instilled that sense of small town mentality, uh, which when I came to Bombay for my graduation, right, forced me to believe and know that I was much behind all the big town kids. And in terms of whether it was spoken English, whether it was general knowledge, whether it was uh, perspective about life, what you want to do in life. Like I had never heard of IIMs, let alone Ivy League colleges, right? This is back in 2003. It was only when I went to IIT Bombay and when I interacted with kids from Bombay, Delhi, Jaipur, etc., that I realized that there are colleges called Harvard and Stanford, and there are colleges like IIM Ahmedabad, and I had no idea of all those things. But that's when you realize that you're much behind all of these kids who are supposed to be your peers, and the promise you make to yourself that if they are supposed to be my peers, I have to be at par with them. If I can't, they have certain privileges, they have a leg up in terms of general knowledge, a worldview, much wider worldview. The way I can even think about competing with them is by working harder than everyone else, right? So that kind of instilled that habit of I have to work harder than everyone else to be at par with them. And that is a small town mentality which sticks with you, right? So one of the things which we keep saying within Nuclei as well, that always look for people who have this fire in the belly, right? Who have some sort of a chip on their shoulders, who have suffered some insecurities in life. Because in order to cope up with that insecurity, there is some other strength which they develop, right? Or in order to cope up with some background behavioral trait which they don't possess, they possess something else which can be their strength, and then you can bank on that strength and work around them. So growing up in small town in Indore turned out to be a very good boon for me, because it instilled that sense of hard work. It instilled this sense that success will only come through hard work and nothing else, right? So you go through the school, and parents did a really great job at putting me in a good school. They worked really, really hard till I eventually went to IIT, when they kind of took a back seat, started focusing on their business, and did really well in their business as well. But for the first 17 odd years of my life, they were completely focused on one and only one thing, which was to make sure that I get a good education. So that's the environment in which I grew up, right?
And if I may add, like,
Yeah.
I think Pallav and I, we would really, it really resonates with me as well. And one other thing that it also does when you go in that environment is, like, they say that you're the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And when you have that kind of a peer group, your bar kind of automatically goes up, as long as, of course, you're willing to put in the work for it.
Correct. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So I remember when during my first year in college, my neighbor, my roomie kind of, he was from Bombay, and his English was perfect. Right? He could speak such fluent English, and I couldn't put a sentence together. But I was a sports person, so I was also very social. I used to go around and meet in group, but he was not so social. So we kind of made a pact with each other that whenever there is a social event, I would drag him along with me, and he would help me with reading Times of India every day, teach me, correct my grammar, not in public, but in in a one-on-one setting, where he could teach me that you can't use past tense in these sentences, etc., etc. Because all these smaller aspects, I can't thank him enough as well, right? Because all these smaller aspects help build your confidence in life. Because today I can't imagine if I go and I'm selling to someone and using improper English. It gives out a signal. I'm not saying it is the right thing to do for others to judge anyone's language, but it gives out a signal which might end up making you lose the deal, or which might not give out the proper impression to the other company or other client who you're trying to pitch. So all these smaller aspects also help in making sure that you build up your self confidence, you build up your personality. So those things really, really, and again, I'm focusing on a very small aspect and not talking about Ivy Leagues and MBAs and dreaming big, because these are the small things which most people don't talk about, right? It's very easy to say that 5 people around me, and they were talking about doing MS in Stanford, or going to MIT, or doing a MBA from Ahmedabad. Yes, they were, but that's true everywhere, right? These are the smaller aspects of personality development, which are often overlooked, and uh, no one talks about it. So I think it is important to also talk about these things.
Are you still really good friends with that person?
Yeah, very good
Yeah,
friends.
it does sound like one of those relationships which you would, your grandkids would be talking to. He would probably be the godfather of your grandkids, something like that.
Absolutely. See, having that honest relationship is very important. Again, you may not have hundreds of such relationships, but at least 4 or 5 such relationships is important, where you know that the other person is the only has good in his or her heart, right? And they're only trying to
Yeah.
help you, and there is no other motivation for them to do it, right?
Yeah.
So when they are
I'm
critical,
really excited. Yeah, sorry, go on. I'll add later.
no, no. So whenever these people are critical about you, your behavior, the way you interact with others, the way you treat others, uh, you don't misread that feedback, right? You take it on its face value and try to become a better person. Like, for example, my mother always keeps on saying that you should be a kind person. You should be a kind person, right? And she keeps giving me examples that you could have spoken in a different tone, you could have treated that person differently. And it's always on face value that I take, because I know that she will never mean harm for me. She will always want me to become a better human being. She doesn't care about my success. She doesn't care about how much deals we crack. She doesn't care about how many employees we have. She doesn't care about how many years or how many startups we build, right? She only cares that you need to be a better human being, and that's it.
Yeah.
So
As long as you've got a full belly, that's always important in your mothers.
yeah, true,
So
true.
you talk about family, friends, upbringing, which we definitely will come back to in some time. But so you went to IIT Bombay, and you had this sort of cultural shock, if I may call it, and then you fought your way through it. Well, how was your journey within those 4 or 5 years? I don't know which course did you do,
Yeah.
and thereafter.
So I did a BTech, so 4 year course, but uh, it's a very humbling experience, because truth be told, you're surrounded with brilliant people, right? And you're surrounded with ambitious people, and a lot of times at a personal level, at an individual level, you also feel lost, because you feel like an imposter. To, to be honest, I felt like an imposter. I felt I didn't belong here. I felt that there are so many brilliant people around me. I don't think I am even half as half knowledgeable as them, right? But as you, Akshay, as you said, that you are essentially an average of 5 people around you, right? You learn from others. I learned a lot from other people. uh, there were people who were dreaming of doing things which I had never even heard of, right? So at least it was exposing me to certain things in life. It was a very good phase from a growth perspective, from a worldview perspective, right? It was also important because it led me to a place where uh, I learned how to acquire knowledge. I learned from seniors in terms of what is important in life, how do you widen your worldview. Uh, just Indore and people and their worldview is not the only thing in life. World is much wider. World is there are a lot more things in life to learn about, right? I think Bombay also taught me a lot of those things. And later on, working at Deutsche Bank taught me a lot of those things when it opened up my mind to a lot of things, to globalization, for example, right? Because I grew up in a town which is a very, very nationalistic town, right? So for most people in that town, India is the best country in the world. Indian culture is the best culture in the world. So to come out of that environment and then force yourself to open up your mind is a difficult task. It takes years, right? It took me years. I won't kid. It took me years to open up my mind. It took me years to understand that there are maybe 100,000 other things in the world which I need to learn, which I need to expose myself to, which I need to absorb from a knowledge perspective. And that is what IIT did for me, right? Uh, Apart from the fact that it sends out a signal, apart from the fact that it gave me a degree, apart from the fact that it gave me good friends for life. Uh, yeah, I think
By the
expanding
way,
the
I have done my master's from a small college in your town, from
okay,
IIT
Indore.
Indore.
Ah,
Yeah,
nice. It's not a small college, but okay.
yeah, really beautiful campus. But I totally understand what you mean by nationalistic town and best of this, rank one in this survey, rank one in that survey. It's quite a. I think there's some truth to it, but also is quite may seem like it's quite well managed. the
It's a very
appearance of the
passionate.
town. Yeah.
It's a very passionate town, right? And I think that's true for any small community. But again, as I said, like I'm talking about Indore, which was 20 years back, not today. It's a decently big town now, right? It was a passionate town. It's still, some pockets is a very passionate town. People are extremely passionate about where they come from. Uh, People are passionate about Indore as a city, right? I am less so now because for 20 odd years I've lived away from Indore, right? But when I speak to my friends who have stayed in Indore throughout, their passion is visible in their body language. So, yeah, I understand. I get that.
And you then got hired by Deutsche Bank. Is that correct?
Correct.
And
Correct.
then you were based in Mumbai, or did you work somewhere else
So
outside?
Bombay and London both.
Okay. And how was it? Were you in an investment banking team or some other team?
Correct. Investment banking team.
So I can imagine this also like in the 2000s when investment banking was like the top choice for all youngsters. How was it working in investment banking in that era?
So I don't know if it was unfortunate or fortunate, but I joined the bank in 2007, right when the financial crisis was hitting, right? Uh, it was fortunate in a way because you get to see the real picture. You get to understand what are the downsides of this industry. And at the same time, you also get to learn a lot because, quite honestly, I think in 2008, there was not much work. There was a lot of uncertainty around that industry, and a lot of kind of capital markets were shut down for that whole year, right? 2008, more or less the whole calendar year, the capital markets were shut down. They only opened up in January of 2009. So you get to learn a lot instead of getting into 14 hours of work every day. There was a lot of learning which happened in 2008. There was a lot of relationship building which happened in 2008. And again, as I said, it was also another kind of a benchmark shift for me. So Indore to Bombay was a benchmark shift. Getting into Deutsche Bank was a benchmark shift because it opened up the worldview again. I had not expected to get a job in Deutsche Bank, to be honest, because I was a six-pointer, was not expecting that I would get a job on day one. It was just purely by luck. By the way, there also the football part and the Indore part played well because the first conversation was with a football player from IIT Kanpur who I had played against. The second conversation was with the HR head of Deutsche Bank who was from Indore, not living 2 kilometers from my house, right? So it was extremely lucky that I got that role, but it was important on multiple levels. As I said, the money which they were offering, quite honestly, was mind-boggling. Over the 3 odd years when I worked at Deutsche Bank, the amount of money which I could earn provided that financial security to my family, right? It That in itself enabled me to take the risk of quitting that job and then starting up, right? And for the past around 14 odd years, I've been building companies. I think if I would not have received, or I would not have gotten that job at Deutsche Bank, I don't think uh, I would have been able to do that. But just purely because I would have still worked on for 3-4 more years to earn enough money to make sure that my parents were secure, right? But working in investment banking made sure that had enough amount of money to kind of back them up and then have with a free mind get into building the businesses, which in itself is from a financial perspective is a risk, right? I don't think it's riskier from a career choice perspective, but from a financial perspective, it definitely is.
So in 2000, you left Deutsche Bank in 2010.
2010.
2010. Okay. And sorry, Akshay, you were saying something.
Yeah. You can continue. I'll add
I was
after.
going to ask another interesting question. So first engineering, and then investment banking, and then food and beverage, or how did that, or like how it came to your mind that after this trajectory, you just land in a completely different industry or business, which I don't think your past 7 years may have directly contributed to in
No,
terms of.
actually,
Uh,
I never saw any role as a way to build my resume. I mean, again, just to use a standard term which people might use, that there was no, it was madness. There was no method to, getting into a new industry as such, that I have this experience and therefore this will add up to
yeah.
and lead me somewhere else. There was no thought of that sort, right? Uh, Quite honestly, at that point of time, the thought was very simple, that I want to run my own business, right? Uh, the definition of or objective at that point of time, obviously, that objective has matured as time went by. But at that point of time, the objective was very simple, that I want my destiny in my own hands, which was a foolish objective, I admit. But I was also 24 years old, so I didn't have much expectations from myself then. So that was the only objective. Why restaurant industry? Quite honestly, I think almost everyone in India, when they sit with friends on a Friday night or a Saturday night, almost everyone dreams of opening up a restaurant, right?
Or a bar or a
Uh,
cafe.
or a bar or a cafe, right? And unfortunately, I was one of those fools who actually went ahead and did it. Right? So it was exactly that. We were sitting, we were drinking beer, having a beer. We thought that we should open up a restaurant. We honestly went ahead and opened up a restaurant 6 months later. So
And when you say
the
we, you were like
I had co-founders. Yeah, I had co-founders along with me. So in hindsight, would I do it? Would I open up restaurants again? Maybe not, right? But again, hindsight is 2020. The amount of learning which I had during those 4 years was insane, right? And again, I'll talk about skill sets which don't get spoken about. Uh, Having the ability to build a business while managing cash flows which are not uh, excessive is a skill set, is a way of life, is a personality trait which comes in handy throughout your life. I think those 4 years were when, and I was managing finance at Rashas, which was the name of our restaurant chain. Uh, those 4 years where I was able to, figure out ways to generate money, raise money from banks, raise money from investors, while making sure that the cash flow is going and we are not getting delayed on salaries, etc. I think it gives you a lot of stress. It makes your hair go gray, but it also adds a lot of value in terms of your strength of personality, that you could, once you have handled certain things 5 times, the sixth time seems easier, right? And that was exactly the case, that when we were having cash flow issues, uh, one way or the other we were able to figure it out, right? And learning that is impossible in a job. Learning that without running your own business or owning your own business or managing cash in your own business is nearly impossible to understand, right? I think that was one of the core skill set which I learned during those 4 years. Sales being the other skill set, right? And those two skill sets are quite honestly the two major skill sets which I'm deploying at Nuclei. One from a cash management perspective, because it is bootstrapped. Two from a sales perspective, again because it is bootstrapped. We didn't have high amount of resources to hire a team of 10 people to go and do sales, right? Like for the first couple of years, it was just one person going and selling there. So learning the skill set of managing cash and surviving, and the skill set of sales, I think these are two life skills which almost everyone should learn, because they come in handy not just in running the business but also in personal life. So I think they are very important.
And this leading to an interesting insight, like you've gone on to start multiple businesses after that also, right?
Correct.
So, and the first one sounds like, hey, it came from within. We did not care much about the financials and the business plan. We want to do it. We are passionate for it. So let's go ahead and do it. How has that approach in selection of ideas evolved from one end of the spectrum, passion, what gets me excited, to maybe what makes more business sense and might not necessarily be as exciting and doesn't necessarily come from within, but makes the most sense to do given the current market expectations or the trends that are on. How has that
Very,
changed across the
very,
other businesses?
very good question. I'll answer it across two parameters. So one is uh, what is my definition of building a good business and how to go about it. The second is from an objective perspective, that as an individual, how has my objective of running a business changed? Like I said, when I was starting Russia's, the objective was having my own destiny in my hand, right? And admittedly, that was a foolish objective because you just cannot have that, right? Uh, but over a period of time, with Russia's, with Blaze, with Tabzo, with Nuclei, we realized that the definition of success in itself kept on changing, right? After a period of time, the definition became money, uh, that we have to earn money, we need to have a lot more money, and that is the definition of success. But then slowly and steadily, as I grew older, people around me became more, you know, wiser. We earned a lot more knowledge and experience and learned from others. We realized that money is just a byproduct. External validation is also just a byproduct. Uh, Money is important because it helps you to solve some pain points, but it cannot give you self-actualization. It cannot give you fulfillment. It cannot give you happiness, right? Freedom over a period of time, I think sometime around 2016 or 17, is when freedom became part of that equation, right?
Mhm.
Where success is essentially is freedom of time, freedom of mind space, and freedom to do different kind of things which you want to do, or freedom from doing certain kinds of things which you don't want to do, right? Freedom from a borders perspective. Now, running a business with multiple subsidiaries allows you to go to multiple borders, multiple countries without worrying about what my visa status is, where will I get visa, etc., etc. Right? So it provides you that level of freedom as well, right? And all these freedoms are earned. They are not given at the start of running a company. You have to earn each and every freedom over a period of time. But today, the definition of success is very, very clear. Yes, money is important to solve certain problems, but after a period of time, money becomes immaterial because it stops being high ROI item, right? You can buy a normal jacket and you can go and buy a Prada jacket. Both will serve the same purpose, right? You can drive a normal sedan and you can drive a Bentley. Both will serve the same purpose of going from point A to point B. So yes, you're spending more money to get a better brand, but the purpose is the same. It doesn't change, right? Having freedom in life gives you a lot more happiness, gives you a lot more fulfillment, gives you a lot of time to think about, to do things which you are passionate about, right? And I think that slowly became the definition of success somewhere around 2016, 17, and has also evolved over a period of time over the last 6, 7 years. From the perspective of starting a business and how to go about building a business, right? I think there are three levels to it. Being a founder myself, and at least these are the three levels which I have gone through, right? When I was starting Rasha's, my primary objective was vanity. It was to get that founder tag. It was to prove to people around me, prove to people in my family, prove to my friends that I'm a founder, right? And it was an extremely stupid metric to go after. It was an extremely stupid objective to go after. I think over a period of time, once you have had that validation, uh, you realize that the objective is actually to build a business. I graduated from that to a level where I said that, you know what, I will build a product. I don't care about anything else, but I will build a product, which I did in my second startup, where I built the product, but the business didn't do well, right? And we had to shut it down after a year for a variety of reasons. But one major reason was that there was no distribution. So you may have the best product from your perspective, you may have the best product in the market, but if you don't have any distribution, it doesn't make sense, right? And that is where the final learning came. That at least, I don't know, at least till date, it is the final learning. I'm sure there are other levels to it as well. But with Nuclear, we were very clear that product is secondary, distribution is primary. Let's get the distribution first. We can always build and improve the product, right? The vanity metrics are of no value, right? So I don't care what my title is. I don't care. I know I have a title on LinkedIn, but that title is external facing, not internal facing, right? Internally, it's a completely flat hierarchy from a communications perspective. But so internally, we don't chase vanity metrics. Internally, we don't care what GMV we are doing, what is our paper valuation, etc. Doesn't matter, right? What we really, really care about is what is our cash flow. Have we been cash flow positive the last month? Have we been cash flow positive the last 3 months, last year? Are we profitable, cash flow positive at an annual basis? Are we profitable on an annual basis, right? These are the real metrics around which you build the business. And from our perspective, the core metric is first get distribution, then figure out the product. Once the product is figured out, you can always improve the product. You can always iterate and go on from there. So the way we started the business of Nuclei, or started the company Nuclei, on the basis of certain guidelines, versus when we started Rush Hours, right, which was nearly 8 years previous, right? The concepts were very, very different. One was on the back of a few beers. The other was on the back of 8 years of experience, right? Where we were clear that we have to optimize for distribution. We have to optimize, build products which get us revenue rather than save cost. We have to focus on multiple geographies, diversify the business, build a sustainable business, right? These were the tenets on which we started building Nuclei. So I myself could see between the two versions, the 2010 version of me and the 2018 version of me, that there was a very big difference in terms of how I looked at building a business, how I thought about building that business, right? So primarily, these were the key differences. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I have an interesting question. Let's say the 10 years old Ankur was watching this podcast episode. Let's imagine this situation and looking at the current Ankur saying, these are the vanity metrics. Money's not that important. Title's not that important. Do you think the past Ankur would have actually changed his mind by listening to a podcast of future Ankur, or let's say any other successful entrepreneur for that matter? And based on your answer, I'll come to the point why am I asking this question.
It's a very good question. So the answer is a yes and no, depending on one single aspect. The 2010 version of me, does that version respect the current version of me? If the answer is yes, the probability of that person, the 2010 version, being convinced is higher. But if that person doesn't respect this version of me, there is no chance. There's no chance that this person is going to believe it, right? So I think respect plays a lot of role in convincing an individual, and that's where the signaling comes into picture, right? The perception comes into the picture, because before you even speak to an individual, you have already formed a perception in your head about that individual, right? From whatever perspective, whatever reasons the signal respects this version of me, I think the probability is higher. If no, then there is no chance at all. Because I also remember that the 2010 version of me was pretty headstrong.
Because and this is something that in a lot of podcasts, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, businessmen, and also creatives, they talk about it like, money's not that important, title's not that important. But we've seen time and again that you only really get a deep understanding of the reality of it once you've gone through it. Once you've made enough money, you look back and you can say to yourself, oh, that was stupid of me. It was not important. Title, not important. And that's something that is really interesting, that how can we make people recognize that without necessarily having to go through that hard experience themselves. But again, not necessarily something that we can solve, but that's something that really, I think, is a very interesting problem, I feel. Sorry, Pallav, I think
it's a extremely valid point, and this is a problem which we face even today with people who work in the team, right? I don't think it's completely solvable, for a very simple fact that the 10,000 hour rule, right? You have to make the mistake yourself to understand it. Now, while learning from others, you can reduce the time to understand that mistake. But learning from your own mistakes and having the honesty to admit that you made that mistake, right, is super important. Yes, you can learn from others theoretically, but I mean, there is a very big difference between theoretically learning something and then implementing it practically, right? So I might have understood those concepts then, but again, the maturity is not there to implement those theoretical concepts into practice. So I think with practice only that maturity comes.
And you mentioned in the first part of your answer that your definition of success evolved and changed as you moved from rush hours to the product company and thereon. Was it just self discovery, or did someone was your mentor as well in that journey, or friends or peer group? And the second part to my question is, you emphasize the word freedom, but could you illustrate what freedom means to you?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I imagine you are running a full-fledged company, so it would be nice for you to throw some light, like what kind of freedom are we talking about?
Sure, sure, absolutely. So the first thing is, no, of course not. It was not just a self-discovery. It was a uh, collaborative effort, if I may say so, right? So learning from peers, learning from juniors, learning from seniors, learning from mentors. It was all around. It was a very homogeneous journey. So there's no particular events in life where I could say that that was exactly the moment where I learned this, right? Uh, these learnings came over a period of time, and uh, the definition changed over a period of time. Like when I did not have money, uh, money was super important, right? When I had some money where it could take care of my pain points, then only you had the. It's it's exactly how it is in Maslow's, right? Unless and until you're not
That was
financially
exactly what was going on in my head. Yeah. Yeah.
unless until you're not financially secure, you can't think about the upper levels, right? You have to first be financially secure, and then you have to think about upper levels. So there were times when I was not financially secure and people were telling me about upper levels of Maslow's, but I couldn't understand them because for me the priority was becoming financially secure first, right? So as I said, like going through those levels also, it's a journey. You can't skip levels. Uh, Maybe some people are able to, but at least I was not able to, right? So I had to go through each level individually, and again, maybe I'm uh, definitely not self-actualized, but trying to be. So it was a journey over a period of time, learning across multiple companies from multiple people. Uh, Part of it was obviously self-discovery, but it, it was not a series of 5 events or 10 events. It was essentially years of experience and years of interaction which led there. The second part of your question was about freedom, right? So a lot of times we kind of restrict ourselves uh, because of societal norms, right? Uh, and I'll explain. Uh, One of the societal norm, and I grew up in a Marathi household where working in a bank is like religion. So if you get a bank job, you have to retire from that bank. You can't leave that job, right? So having the freedom to quit that job, I did not have that in 2010. Because when I said to my family that I'm quitting my job, there was an uproar. There was a kind of an intervention arranged. Everyone was like, "How can you do that? You have so much privilege. You are lucky to get this job. Why do you want to quit your job? It doesn't make any sense." And I was called all my names, all the names, right? So, point is, you don't. I did not have that freedom at that point of time. Why? Because society was driving those decisions. My decision to go to IIT Bombay was not my own. I did not have any clue as a 15-year-old kid that IIT Bombay is a good college. It was just fed to me that if you want to be successful in life, please study for JEE, right? So it was all fed to me. It was extremely society driven. It was not by my free will that I was taking those decisions, right? Getting a day one job and getting into Deutsche Bank, quite honestly, was also not out of free will. It was a financial decision. I had a call from a couple of IIMs, but I didn't go there. Why? Because for me, getting that financial security was more important than getting an MBA degree, right? So it was also not a free will choice of free will. It was a completely finance driven or a society. When do you reach a place in your life where you can take your own decisions? where you become independent of the society, that is freedom, a version of freedom, right? But there also, if you are working in a job, right, do you have the freedom to take 10 days leave? Do you have the freedom to get away from your monthly salary, right? That and by the way, I'm just talking about my personal perspective, okay? So do not confuse this as a perspective which is applicable on a lot of other people. No, it is not. It is just my perspective. Being dependent on monthly salaries for me was not freedom, because it restricted me from doing a lot of other things, right? Therefore, starting a business made sense because I wanted that freedom. I did not want to depend on monthly salaries because it did not allow me to take the risks which I wanted to take. So having that freedom is important in life from my personal perspective. Having the freedom of time, and as I said, like as this was in hindsight, this was the definition of one of the reasons or part of the reasons why I quit and started business. But to get that freedom over a period of time, having control of your time and having control on your calendar rather than the other way around, the calendar controlling you, became important, right? So I don't want my calendar controlling me, but I want to control my own calendar. I want to control my own timelines, right? That became a freedom, which again is not something which is given. It has to be earned over a period of time. Freedom on your mind space. So let me give you an example. Having dinner with your family, but thinking about problem statements at work, present in the moment. You're not focusing on what you're doing right now. Going on a vacation, but worrying about problems at work. You're not living the moment. You are essentially continuing to work, continuing to solve your problem statements, but you're not present in the moment. So that was something which I caught myself doing a lot of times and said that this is something which I want freedom from. I want to enjoy the moment. I want to be present in that moment. Whatever I'm doing, I'm talking to you guys. I don't want to be worrying about what is going on in the background, what is happening with one client or what is happening with another product development, right? All those things should be structured in a way. The responsibility should be distributed in a way so that I have the freedom to be present in the moment, whatever I'm doing. And that is a freedom which I craved, right? I don't think I have achieved that freedom completely as of now, but that's a freedom which I'm chasing, right? Then third comes the freedom of boundaries or freedom of borders, or in general freedom, that how can I move across borders without any restrictions? Can the business grow across geographies? Not just for me, by the way, I'm talking about the team, right? Can it grow across borders so that they have freedom of borders? They don't have these boundaries. They can move from one place to another without having any restrictions, right? That is also a freedom which we crave right now. We don't have it yet, to a certain extent, yes, but not completely. But that's an objective which we want to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years. So as we grow forward, I think the definition of freedom or the parameters of freedom or varieties of freedoms, we'll just keep on adding them to our definition of success or as an objective and keep on attaining them. Because I think life becomes much more enjoyable once you have these freedoms in life. That's, again, as I said, my perspective.
Uh, yeah, yeah. This is actually a really nice segue into one of the core things that we want to cover in our conversation with you, which is firstly, I think it would be really keen for me to hear, when was the first seed of moving beyond borders that was set inside you? And then how did that transpire? You live in Portugal right now, right? So we definitely, I'm pretty sure our viewers would be really interested in knowing, and Portugal is one of the hottest destinations to move to, given the weather and everything, and the business environment. So how did that happen? Was that easy? And anything that you can share on making that process for someone who is aspiring to do that easier as well?
So growing a business across geographies was a thought on day one. We had to prepare for it. We had to build that mental model, have that mentality from day one, right? So we were very clear in 2018 that we will be a multi-geographic company. So we won't restrict ourselves to just India. We'll be in Middle East, we'll be in Southeast Asia, we'll be in Africa, we'll be in Europe. In 2018,
And where did that personally come to you from? Like, I guess you also had it for some reason, right? Like that you wanted to do that, or did that just develop naturally and there isn't anything particular?
So we were a bootstrapped company. We didn't. We had not raised any external capital. We haven't still raised any external capital. In order to survive, diversification was the name of the game, right? And the three parameters across which we wanted to diversify, one was products, obviously. Second was industries. So we had chosen three: banking, telcos, and insurance. And the third was geography. The idea was very simple, that if we are investing prime years of our life, we can't have concentration risk in the business. That concentration risk could be with respect to a product, could be with respect to an industry or a client, or could be with respect to a geography. And we had to diversify across. The idea was not that we'll diversify across all those three parameters in 2018 or 19 itself, but over the next 7-8 years, we have to diversify across all these parameters, right? And we have successfully diversified across products, nearly diversifying across industries, definitely diversified across geographies, right? And now slowly growing. So it was a thought on day one. This was not an afterthought, if you're asking that, right? We grew to Middle East first, quite honestly, because of the cultural, like close cultural,
Yeah.
you know, relationships between both the geographies, India and Middle East. Then we grew into Southeast Asia, and now we are growing into Europe and Africa. Why Lisbon? Multiple reasons. One of the reasons, and why did I move here, right? Like I did not move to Dubai. One of the senior leaders in the team, he had moved to Dubai. Why did I move here? Because primarily speaking, when you're again running a bootstrap business, you have to worry about costs. You have to worry about return on investment. You have to also worry about what is a highest leverage activity that you can do, right? Moving to Europe, it's logical from a coming from an English speaking geography to go to either a London or Amsterdam, right? Uh, but both London and Amsterdam are, one, expensive, two, will not give us the segue or the next leg into newer geographies, right? Portugal and Spain, and these are the two options, enable us to then get into Latin America and Central Americas, right? Because you'll have similar language speakers available in this geography. We can have a lot of people who we can employ into the company and who can then start selling into those geographies, right? So that was one of the reasons why between Portugal and Spain chose Portugal. Portugal, incidentally, is also a country which is extremely animal friendly, right? Uh, I have two dogs. I had to get them here, and I was not ready to take them to a geography which was not animal friendly. So I can't tell you, like this city in particular, this country in particular is so good with their animals that I've been blown away with the hospitality which those two get. Forget about me. I don't care about myself, right? But those two get so much hospitality, right? Any shop they visit, any restaurant they visit, they are the ones who get served first than me, right? So I'm extremely happy about that. And I think it speaks volumes about the culture and the society, the way they treat animals, right? Uh, I think that's again. I didn't like. I had theoretical information of that upfront. I didn't have first-hand experience of that, but over the last few months, I've experienced that, and I can say that was a very good choice, Portugal.
And how was the actual visa process? What did you have to do? What should someone consider who is thinking of making not necessarily, let's say, a similar move of opening a business, but just planning to move? Was your experience on that front?
So this was during COVID, right? So during the COVID years, so obviously the timelines which I experienced were much longer. But what I hear now, the timelines have considerably reduced. The process was pretty straightforward. It was not like documents. So for me, it was a challenge primarily because it's not a country where most Indians go, right? So the process is not standardized or is not very well known. So I had to
Exactly.
go through the whole process of understanding what all documents do you require. I hired a lawyer here to help me with the documentation, but quite honestly, could have done it myself as well. It was not rocket science, right? So pretty standard set of documents, pretty standard set of requirements with respect to those documents, what have to be translated, what have to be apostilled, etc., etc. But once those things were done, I think the process became pretty straightforward, right? Then after, you just have to go through the process of applying for the visa and then getting the visa and then coming here and going through the whole 9 yards. Uh, I don't think from a process perspective there was any ambiguity or there were any gaps which was surprising for me, right? The only thing which I was a bit skeptical about was the language barrier. I'm not yet a Portuguese speaker, learning Portuguese, but not yet quite fluent at it, right? That was my only concern. That given that it's not majorly a English speaking geography, would that be a challenge? But quite honestly, that hasn't been a challenge. You have enough people who understand enough English to lead a peaceful life here. So I don't, I haven't found too big a challenge with respect to moving here. One of the things which was highlighted to me was that it's an extremely bureaucratic country. And I told them that I'm coming from India. So should I, like, how should I manage my expectations? But quite honestly, for them, bureaucracy means that you have to wait in line for 20 minutes. And I'm absolutely fine with that. So getting your documentation done in a day or getting your documentation done in 3 days is not a challenge for me. So for some countries, that's a definition of bureaucracy. For me, that's extremely fast work, right? So I was not bothered by the so-called bureaucracy in this country because I don't think that is bureaucracy. That's fairly efficient work, right? So uh, that's been my experience. I haven't had any, honestly, I haven't had any challenges with respect to any governmental work or any documentation work which I've had to do here. Uh, Almost everything got done online. Almost everything.
Okay.
There was just, I think, one document which I had to go and get it because it's a physically signed document. I had to go get that from the local office, which is also not like 200 meters from my house. Uh, but it's a walkable city, and I mean, I have two dogs, so I enjoy walking. Like, we walk around 7-8 kilometers every day, and it's a walkable city, and it's a lovely city to live in. The weather, as you mentioned, it's
Do you
amazing, right?
do you think the process would be very different for someone who is not an entrepreneur, like just wants to move to Portugal?
So
I
they
mean,
have this,
let's say assume Indian passport.
yeah. So they have this digital nomad visa. I don't think it's for a longer duration. It's for a shorter duration, 1 or 2 years. I'm not completely aware of that, but I think
Mhm.
the details are fairly available on the website. Digital nomad, it is for anyone who has some basic salary being credited to their account, right?
Okay.
So they just need to provide their salary statements, and that visa is pretty straightforward. Uh, I think the biggest challenge is getting the slot with VFS in India. The challenge is
Okay.
not about getting the visa approved from Portugal and the Portuguese embassy, right? The biggest challenge is that you don't have enough slots available, or the slots are not available on VFS website in India, and that becomes the bottleneck. Everything else is pretty straightforward.
And you see a
So
lot of Indians or non-Europeans coming in now.
yeah, so I'm interacting with a group of like an incubator here, which incubates around 200 odd startups. I think more than 100 startups are non-Portuguese, including the
Mm.
founders, right? So
Yeah.
uh, a lot of startups are being set up here. A lot of I mean, Lisbon, specifically Lisbon, is a very heavy touristy area, right? So you have a lot of different nationalities coming into town, but at least people who I interact with, more than half the people are not native Portuguese. But that could also be because I am an immigrant myself, so that could be a reason.
And what was the category of the visa that you personally applied for and got it? How long did it take for you to like start up the process till the time that you actually like got to the end and you could move?
So I applied for D7.
Mm-hmm.
Took me how many months? Around 6, 7 months. But as I said, this was during peak COVID, right? So,
Yeah.
which this time duration I think has reduced to around 45 odd days now to get the visa. And yeah, once you get the visa after 45 odd days, 1.5 months or less than 2 months, you can then just fly here. There is this interview where you get your resident card. That interview is pretty straightforward. I don't think much documentation is also required. I think 2 or 3 documents are required. Pretty straightforward. Once you have that interview, you get your resident card within a month or so, if I'm not wrong.
And
So the
just
process, yeah, please go ahead.
was there a capital requirement attached with this D7 visa?
There is
Or
some
like
capital
minimum
requirement, but
assets,
it's
or
not much. Yeah, there is some capital requirement, but not much. Not much.
would you give our viewers a ballpark, like if you remember?
I think it was. It depends on how many people you are applying to.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the number. I applied for it like a couple of years back. I think per person it's around 20 or 25 or thousand euros, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Not for dogs.
So not for dogs. Dogs only need to be vaccinated and nothing else.
Yeah.
Everything else. Yeah. Not for dogs.
Yeah, because I've had friends who've mentioned about more capital requirements, but I guess that's like a different category of visa where they had to choose a different kind of an investment vehicle in which they would be investing the money. And that's where I think a lot of the uncertainty and a lot of the discomfort for people lies, that, hey, I'm not sure whether I'm investing in the right place or not. Do you have any insights around in that process also?
Yeah, so that's the golden visa, right? You're talking about.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So Portugal recently changed that law, and I think earlier it was one of the routes through which a lot of people were investing in coming to Portugal. But I think now they have restricted the real estate purchase as a route. So now it's only investment into, I think, scientific research or R&D, and investment into startups, which are again definitely do read the actual official requirements. But what I know, these are the only two routes now available from a golden visa perspective. Now, earlier it was attractive, but again, you have to invest a lot of money and retain that asset in the country for X amount of time, and only then it makes sense. For me, it made sense because for me, D7 made sense because it's kind of an OPEX rather than a CAPEX requirement. So OPEX is much easier, lesser on the wallet expense, lesser on the investment side on a yearly basis, and gets you the same result.
I have a question now on the personal side. So we talked enough of professional startups. How is it? I mean, I have a couple of questions. You can answer them in whichever order you feel comfortable. One, you mentioned about the evolution of your definition of freedom, right? Freedom to follow a certain passion, freedom to be mindful. How has your European experience has been? Because I'm sure Portugal is probably slightly different than Netherlands, for example, but the lifestyle upbringing of most of the people in Europe is quite different. Like they're already, you can say, free right the moment they're born. The social security net, the ample, the excellent healthcare, no societal pressure to like do engineering or become a doctor. They could do anything and still earn minimum wage of 14, 15 euros. That part.
Yeah.
And the other part is slightly different. Is like, how's your relationship with your parents? Because you mentioned you are the only child, and Indore is let's say not like Delhi, you can take a direct flight, for example. How is your relationship with your roots, if I may call?
Two very good questions. Two very good questions. So I'll take the first one first. You're absolutely right. The culture in this society is very, very different to the culture which at least Indians grew up in, right?
Yeah.
And to quote Maslow's again, I think it's the difference between that. As a kid, I was born probably in the second level of Maslow's, where my parents were working hard to provide that financial security. Nearly provided it, but I still had to work to get that financial security done for the family, right? We are instilled since childhood that we need to save for the rainy day, right? What is that rainy day? We don't know. That rainy day could be a medical emergency. That rainy day could be some other sort of emergency, right? Could be a natural disaster, could be anything else. But when we ask ourselves what those rainy days are, we also forget to question the fact that what are insurances for, right? The fact that you need savings for a rainy day, which could be a medical emergency or a natural disaster, is because the insurance doesn't work well or it doesn't serve the purpose, right? But when you look in this society, most of the kids, and when I say kids, like early 20s people, right, who are probably generation Gen Z, do we call them? We call them Gen Z, right? So
Yeah, Gen Z.
But also millennials. No one is saving. There is no concept of saving here because there is no rainy day here. Everything is taken care of, right? So when I got my job, my dad instilled in me that 50% of whatever you earn, you have to invest and you have to save, right? And that's been true throughout. Like, even if I was earning less, 50% went into investments or savings. But if you compare it with this geography, that's not the point. No one cares because everything is taken care of. And I think that's such a big load, such a big stress of shoulders of a early 20s kid that they don't have to worry about that their family will go through a medical emergency and therefore they have to provide for it, or there will be a natural disaster and the government won't take care of it, right? That, I think, as a socialist society, especially in Western Europe, I think is a very, very well taken care of aspect. And I don't think people appreciate this side of Europe a lot more than they should. We do because we don't have it back home, right? And that's why we appreciate it a lot more. That holy, this is something which is taken care by the society and by the government, and I think that's a wonderful. So that's how these are the building blocks of a society, right? Like, again, I don't want to be too critical of India, but the amount of tax we pay, and think about if you're living in Bombay in a gated community, the water is private, the electricity is private, education is private, roads are private. You pay toll tax for almost all the roads, right? Schools are private. Your security is private, and you still end up paying 30-40% tax, right? So the question which we need to, and here also, if there is a medical emergency, you are just hoping that your insurance works, right? In most cases, which it doesn't, right? It doesn't cover everything. You have to still co-pay. It doesn't cover everything. But you look in European society, if there is any medical emergency, everything is covered for, right? So I think that pressure, that upbringing in itself, as a culture, as a society, is very, very different here, which is not something back home, right? So I think that's a very big difference. Second question which you asked about my relationship with parents. So you're right, distance is a concern, will always be a concern, is always plays upon my mind that if there is any emergency, how do I go back, right? And both the questions are correlated. Why? Because if my parents are in Europe, I'm not worried. Why? Because if anything happens to my dad, my mom just needs to call 112 and that's it. Right? I know even if I take 2 days to reach here, he will be taken care of. In Indore, I'm not so sure. Although they have a good social circle, I know, they will help, etc., etc., and has happened in the past, and there has been help, etc. But point is that fear is still there. That it's not sitting well. I have to be there personally to get things done, and I'm not. I'm going by my own experience that if you are there in person, things happen faster, right? If you're not there, things happen slow. So my concern with my parents is only from a medical perspective, that you need to be in a place where there are medical facilities available. Now they're entering an age bracket where medical facilities and getting having them readily available is something which is very, very important. Uh, and that's one of the main conversation topics between us, right? Me moving to Europe, I think it's pretty straightforward, because over a period of time, this conversation has happened between us that I have to grow the business. This is an opportunity which I cannot let go, and whatever is required to grow the business, I'll have to do, right? So for the last 1.5 years in between, my dad's health was not great, so I stayed put in India. But once he was given the all clear, and we spoke to the doctor and said that no, everything is okay, that's exactly when I decided to move to Portugal, right? Uh, so these things do happen. These things do change course of things. These things do have an impact on your decision making and your timelines. But I think that's okay. I mean, I'm not too fussed about it. I'm not too worried about it. It's all part and parcel of life, and things will come, things will go, and you know.
And uh, I don't know where you think you are in the journey of your
Mhm.
purpose and building long-term wealth. There were two questions on this. One is why you emphasize the word long-term wealth when money definition of freedom has changed. Why is such a big focus still? And the other thing is, are you also adopting some inspiration from the Sridhar Vembus of the world, going back to the village in Indore, running the global company from there, and instilling the best of both the Western experience and the Eastern experience? I'm not sure if you're a follower of him or people like
No, I
them.
respect Sridhar Vembu a lot. I respect a lot of what he has built at Zoho. But quite honestly, I'm not reached a place where I am even thinking of this sort, that I will go back and do something in Indore, right? So not there yet. Possibly 10 years later, I might be there, but at least today, I'm not there. I don't even I've not even thought about it, right? To be honest. Uh, Sorry, the first question was about long-term
Uh,
wealth, right?
yeah, long-term
Um,
wealth. Why is that important still? Or
so
or maybe you can redefine if it's you mean something else by that.
yeah, so when I say wealth, I don't mean money. Money is a variable in the definition of wealth. The other variable, big portion of the definition is freedom, right? Uh, so wealth for me is not just money; it is a holistic definition of wealth. Secondly, it's not just about me as an individual, right? It's also about rest of the team. So leading a good life, having a good way of life, uh, that is a primary objective of building the team at Nuclei, right? So we have to make sure that whoever is working at Nuclei is leading a good way of life, or is leading a good life. And that means having enough money to solve certain problem statements, but also having enough freedom to lead a good life, right? Being satisfied, being happy across variety of aspects of life. I don't want anyone in Nuclear to work for 16 hours and not have enough time to play with their kids. Like, it is ridiculous. It's ridiculous of me to expect that. It's ridiculous of that individual to do it, right? Because the time doesn't come back. The
Yeah.
time which you can spend with your kid and your dog is never going to come back, right? So uh, utilize that time more efficiently, I would say, right? So there's no point in working 14 hours and showing to everyone that I worked 14 hours, because everyone knows it's extremely difficult to work with full energy for more than 6 hours every day.
Yeah.
So instead, just work with full energy with complete focus for 6 hours every day and be good. Like, let that compound over 10 years. If you do 6 hours of dedicated work daily for 10 years, I think that's more than good enough. So long-term wealth is not just individually, but more from a team's perspective. Did I answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Palav, good. Yeah.
Awesome.
So it sounds like for the last few years, the time of Nuclei and maybe a little bit before that, and especially since the move from India to Portugal, a lot of things that you have mentioned have been in the positive direction. Can you maybe also talk about what have been the lowlights, some of the moments where you felt like this is not it, why am I doing this, and help us get a little bit more insight into how you dealt with them?
So I don't know if I should go into this, but unfortunately, it's both professional and personal, right? So professionally, from a nuclear perspective, 2019 was tough. The first year was tough. Uh, we took certain missteps from a cultural perspective of building the team. I think we course corrected towards end of. So every year there has been one or the other event which has been significant, right? So we course corrected around mid of 2019. Took us nearly good 2 years to course correct from that place. But I
So
think
you had to
now,
like let go of people, you mean?
yes.
Hmm.
Uh, we then doubled down on what we wanted to build from a cultural perspective, and I think post 2019, I think we have done a decent job. I wouldn't say we have done a spectacular job, but we have done a decent job in building up the culture at Nuclei, right? And I think more importantly, now we have the right team to be kind of guardians of this culture, building this culture up from what we have been building over the last 3 odd years, right? um, 2020 COVID hit. It was ridiculous. uh, it was extremely high amount of chaos and uncertainty. We had no idea what we would do, but um, post the lockdown, I think in March, end of March 2020, we rallied together. I think the team stuck together. We didn't fire anyone. uh, we took voluntary pay cuts. Even interns took pay cuts, right? Which was very heartwarming to see. But we eventually fought back from that place, increased our revenue, and by October we were back to normal. 2021 was a year where, so 2020, early 2021 was also one of the years where we signed one of our biggest deals, right? But 2021 was also a year which was extremely painful for me because I lost my sister during second week, right? Uh, that
Sorry to
kind
hear
of
that.
that was no,
Okay.
it's okay. It's been no more than 2.5 years, but uh, and I don't want to forget that. But that was one of those times where I was like completely broken, and I was questioning myself that what am I doing? Right? Why am I doing this? What am I doing? Um Also, one of the reasons why uh, I was pretty pissed off with the system, that the system was not working. System had completely broken down in India in April and May of 2021, right? And
The system
that
of
the whole medical facilities
the
was
medical facility system.
completely broken down, right?
Yeah.
Um, Medical facilities, the infrastructure around it. And I know, I mean, from a political perspective, it's shown that no, everything was working fine, but everyone knows what was happening, right? Uh, so that was a time where it took me a while to recover from that. Uh, I don't know if I've still recovered from it, but that particular time was extremely difficult for me. But again, from a team perspective, I was very, very happy that I was not in office for around a month or so, but team carried on, made sure that everything was stable, etc., etc. Uh, we launched two new products in 2022. Uh, those products are now starting to build some revenue on themselves. But building up the team also has its ups and downs. There were a few leaders who came and went. There was some attrition due to that. But I think now, having just completed 5 odd years, I think we have a good team in place. We have diversified across people as well. I don't think the company is even dependent on me as an individual. So even if tomorrow I am not there, I think the company will survive and thrive. And I think that is the most important thing, because not having being diversified or being dependent on a single individual, I don't think you can build a good company around an individual, right? Because then it's the concentration risk is very, very high. So over the last 3 odd years, we have very deliberately hired leaders, hired entrepreneurs, given them enough freedom in their roles, and made sure that they have enough responsibility and they take care of their responsibility, right?
Have
That
you
diversifies the lead.
invested? Have you invested in any of Elon Musk's companies?
No, why? No, I'm not.
You were
I'm not.
talking about diversifying and not being dependent on one person, and I guess those are the
No,
companies.
no, no,
Anyways,
I'm not.
continue. Yeah.
I'm not. I have like personally, I've invested in a lot of companies in India, but mostly blue chip companies. Uh, quite honestly, and cash flow, very, very healthy cash flow generating companies. Again, very business minded. Then the like
Than that.
people and founders who are building dhandas. Essentially,
Yeah.
I'm very bullish on them. Right. Paper valuation doesn't excite me at all. So yeah, I mean, there have been significant ups and downs over the last 5 odd years, both on the personal front and professional front. But the beauty is that we are still standing here, right? The point which I was trying to make earlier, that Russia's taught me one good thing was to survive, right? So I have full confidence in the team that whatever happens, we'll survive. We'll figure a way out, and I think that confidence is also earned, and it cannot be given out or gifted to someone. You have to go through those downturns together to earn that confidence that what, no matter what, even if we lose half the revenue today, we'll figure a way out in the next 1 month itself. So that's something which is really heartwarming for me.
Like, I had one other question that I was particularly interested in, and it kind of links to what you were talking about earlier also. And you've written in one of your posts that along with Jeff Bezos's regret minimization framework, you also look at joy maximization, right? And so how in practical terms, how do you do that on like your personal and also perhaps like the professional side?
Absolutely. Very good question. And I think it's not about the work that you do, it's about who you do with, who you do it with, right? So if you're not enjoying working with your co-workers, if it is stressful to work with the people you work on a day-to-day basis, I don't think you should do that. I don't think that role is for you. You should completely, as fast as possible, move away from that role, because the only non-renewable resource in this world is time. Why waste your time with 5 people who you don't enjoy working with? Why waste your time with a manager who you don't enjoy working with? Why waste your uh, and that goes both ways, right? Because both of the individuals are not enjoying. It's not just the manager's fault or the person reportee's fault. Both of them are not enjoying working with each other. There are 8 billion more people to work with. Why do you have to get stuck with those 5 or 4 or 10 people, right? So having enjoying work with your coworkers, I think, is absolutely, absolutely necessary. If anyone, whether within Nuclei or anywhere else, is not doing it, I would recommend them to quit that job or quit that role and find something else to do, right? I've been very blunt about this, that the day I don't enjoy working at Nuclei, I will quit. I will say that, what, you guys carry on building Nuclei. I don't want to do it because I'm not enjoying that. But till the day I'm enjoying it, I will love it, right? I would want to do work which I enjoy. I would want to work with people who I enjoy working with. And that should be true for everyone, not just me individually, right? So uh, when you work with people, it doesn't feel like work, right? It's just life. So There's also something which I keep saying internally, that I don't think there's anything called work-life balance. It's just life. It's a choice that we are choosing to do this work. But it's part and parcel of life. We can't just say that this is my work life and this is my personal life. I think it's one and the same thing, and that's how it should be. So if you enjoy working with people, continue working with them. If you don't, don't do it.
I love that's absolutely like wonderful to hear. In fact, that is, both Pallav and I were friends first, and then we were on our separate journeys together, like even though separate, but together, constantly sharing with each other. And that's when we realized that, hey, actually, we just really enjoy not just hanging out, but also working together. So I completely feel you. So and I think that's a beautiful note to conclude the conversation. That, the, as you said, the non-renewable resource, which is time, is the most important thing that we should be careful about. Who we spend it with, and whatever we spend it on, is something that we genuinely enjoy. And with that, I would like to once again thank you very much, Ankur, for taking out the time today and being with us.
Oh,
By the
thank you
way,
so much,
last
Akshay
thing,
Pala.
is there anything our viewers that you would want to say to them that they can support you with? Anything at all?
That's a lot to ask. I'm good, actually. I'm good. I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That's it.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on.